Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Dan Worth from the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities. And we are thrilled today to have as our guest Dr. Laura Sherman.
Michigan is obviously, we have a Democratic governor, we have a Republican legislature. Energy issues aren't really partisan, but all of these issues need to be solved in a bipartisan manner. I have seen opinions change. I've seen policy makers change their minds and feel more pressure to do something if they've heard from a lot of folks. You don't need to say much. You don't need to be an academic, PhD expert on whatever this issue is. They don't know it that well either. You just need to tell them yes, no on something. And I think that really matters.
Dr. Sherman is the president of Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council, an institute for energy innovation. She most recently served as the organization's vice president for policy development and as a senior consultant at Five Lakes Energy, and previously as policy advisor to Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado on energy, agriculture, and environmental issues. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. We've really enjoyed the work of MEIBC over the last 4 or 5 years, and you guys have really evolved and done wonderful things. I'm wondering if you can tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and MEIBC, sort of the evolution of both to this moment.
Sure. Yeah. So, I'll start simply with myself. I actually have a PhD in isotope geochemistry, as obscure as that is, from the University of Michigan, Earth and Environmental Science Department. So I was in academics. I studied mercury pollution and tracing where the pollutants go in the environment and kind of new methods to fingerprint mercury pollution. And so policy was really important. There's regulations on mercury, state and federal regulations. There's a lot of interest in harmful pollutants in public health. And I worked with a lot of public health professors, but really, I was writing papers where the tagline was, "This is really important to policymakers." And I felt like, I think now I know, no one was reading them. No policymakers were digging into the academic literature and reading that. And so I had one sort of, enlightening moment where I had a meeting. I think we had a speaker from the EPA who was working, a woman really in deep on the mercury regulations. This is when they were first crafting them. Yeah. And I told her about my research, and she sort of looked at me like, "Oh man." And she was like, "Well, that would have been good to know 6 months ago. Like, we could have really used that information to strengthen our rules." And so it was sort of this moment where I was like, I really care about these issues. I'm not making an impact. I'm not having the impact I want in the ivory tower of academia, which is very valuable. But I think I wasn't. Some folks have, I work with a lot of folks in academics now who really are able to make that crossover, and I just hadn't yet. And so I decided to learn more about policy, and one of the best ways, I think, that a program that's set up to allow academics to do that is called the AAAS Fellowship. It's the American Academy for the Advancement of Science. Yeah. And they have 2 sets of fellowships, one in executive branch agencies in DC and one in Congress. So I got a fellowship through the American Geophysical Union to go to DC, spend a year helping, I'm using air quotes if you're on the podcast, largely really learning about policy and trying to, as much as you can in that position, help. And, a couple of things I learned really quickly, that my research, I counted 4 times that I actually used my scientific training directly in that role. But that wasn't the most important thing that I already knew how to do. I knew how to read things fast, I knew how to collate things, I knew how to make things understandable to people, and knew how to take complicated concepts and shrink them down. And so all of that was really instructive. And I was lucky enough, the person I was working with ended up leaving the office. I worked for Senator Bennet from Colorado after about 6 months. And so I use the tried and true stay on and they can't get rid of you method, which I highly recommend.
Nicely done.
And hung around long enough that they hired me. And so I got to stay for a couple more years. Ended up covering all of his energy, Senator Bennett's energy, environment, and agriculture policy from DC. I work with a team in Colorado and in DC covering those issues for the senator. So that's kind of how I got into policy, and
Colorado's known
wanted
for,
to come back.
Yeah, and isn't Colorado
Yeah, go
really
ahead,
known
sorry.
for energy policy and progressive stuff? Did you learn a ton? Is there a toolkit you took out of that that's
I
helping
learned
in
a
Michigan?
ton. Yes. And that's, I knew I wanted to come back to the Midwest. I specifically to Michigan, and I wanted to work in a state that had a lot of energy issues. Was really, I mean, they have natural gas fracking, they're producing oil, they're producing coal, they've got a ton of wind, they've got solar, they've got everything right there. They're actually producing it. We're not just talking about it. We're actually producing it. And, shifting now, but really probably starting to shift then, but it was a really purple state. I think it's moving a little, probably more towards blue, but it's a really purple state. And so I wanted to work in a state where I had to do bipartisan efforts. I didn't want to work for a senator where they were going to take a stand on issues and not have to negotiate across the aisle. And so we were never allowed to introduce a bill that was not bipartisan.
Fantastic.
Senator Bennet just did not do that. And so that's really served me well. I mean, Michigan is obviously, we have a Democratic governor, we have a Republican legislature. Energy issues aren't really partisan, and EIBC is not a partisan organization, but all of these issues need to be solved in a bipartisan manner.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And EIBC does a great job of that. Can you tell us a little more sort of about the evolution of EIBC and how it started and how it came to be here? I first met it through Liesl Clark when she was there doing wonderful work. So would love to hear a quick history.
Yeah. So, and my knowledge of the early years are probably less clear, but it was founded in 2011. The original goal and mission, I think, remains the same today, which is to be the business voice of advanced energy in Michigan. So we've grown from, I think, 13 or so, 10 or so original member companies. We now have about 120 member companies. Yeah, and ups and downs through the years, but trajectory of consistent growth. And our goal is to really set the policies that'll help those members create more jobs and do more business in Michigan. And we're really, I don't want to say technology agnostic, but we represent all different technologies in the advanced energy sphere. Our only rule is that we do not have utilities as members. So no regulated utilities that do work in Michigan are members of EIBC. Nice. And so I think that allows us to represent the sort of third party energy developers who are, not fossil fuel interests in general, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, wind, solar, sort of a huge range of companies.
Yeah. And it's funny, we often hear of chambers of commerce and industry groups as sort of the laggards on climate and clean energy. Seems like the script is getting flipped in Michigan. And a lot of the companies I'm seeing as part of your ranks are the major employers, are becoming that. So it must be kind of fun to be a sort of pseudo chamber doing this brilliant advanced energy work.
It is. I like the way you characterize us. I do think I think that we are, what's the saying, punching above our weight at this point. And I think that the organization has really grown through the great leadership of folks you mentioned, like Liesl Clark, to what it is today. And I think with all of our members, we're employing so many people and so many different interests across the state that I think it's nice to think of it as a mini chamber of commerce. And we're definitely seeing our influence more, I think, over the years in front of lawmakers, in front of the regulators, working with the utilities on certain things, working to get them to do certain things better in other cases. And I think that, a lot of our members are also members of the Michigan Chamber. And so I don't want to discount that. I think the Chamber has a huge role to play. And I think our members becoming their members helps us think about places where our missions are aligned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned jobs. We love that word. I know you guys put out an annual report. Can you give us a sense of the clean energy, advanced energy, and mobility jobs in Michigan and the Midwest? Just what's that's looking like, this growth?
Yeah, well, so actually, I don't want to take credit for reports of others. So it's actually, I think the report you're mentioning is from Clean Jobs Midwest, and they're a consortium of groups, and we are a state partner with them. We help them on their Michigan work, and they do great work. We were at 125,000 clean energy jobs in Michigan, leading the Midwest. Huge growth.
125,000.
Unfortunately, yeah, and it's split across a lot of different sectors: advanced transportation, energy efficiency, renewables. All of our members represented there. We've seen a lot of job losses, over the in March and April and May because of the pandemic. And I don't have the most recent numbers. I'm hoping we see a lot of job growth again and rehiring. We're at least anecdotally hearing that from our members, but I don't have the numbers on that yet. But I expect it to rebound as hopefully that we get through this.
Yeah. And how are the members doing? Has your guys' role changed a bit now that it's sort of not playing defense, but helping them get through this tough time? It must be a total pivot, as it is for many people these days. And what does that look like, and how's it feeling and working?
Yeah, well, I'm extremely lucky to. There's only our staff is really small. There's 3 of us. We have a 15-person board that governs us, but I'm really lucky to work with a very creative and agile staff. So Corey Connolly and Nicole Forward. We shifted everything online. So we shifted we have events every, week or 2 weeks, usually in person. We shifted all those online. We've been doing a ton of content for our members and for the public. We're still doing legislator education online.
Nice.
We're testifying in front of the legislature online, virtually. I think actually in some ways it's a lot nicer than spending my 2 hours driving to Lansing to do those kind of things. We started a new series for our members that we're calling Bring Your Own Lunch and Learn. But we shifted to the beginning of that. We really brought in folks who were experts on what the state was doing, what MEDC was doing, because the message we heard from our members was that a lot of our companies are small businesses. So anything that helps small businesses helps our companies. Yeah. So information about the Paycheck Protection Program, information about loans, grants, those kinds of things are helpful to all of them as they are to other small businesses.
Yep. No, fantastic. And looking at Michigan as a state now, I think we're on this wonderful trajectory. Saw Ann Arbor, Traverse City, Petoskey declaring 100% goals, a lot of businesses getting out in front of it and declaring goals. Up here we got Cherry Republic and others really driving this forward. But I'm wondering if you can sort of fill us in on where you see Michigan headed, for this immediate term and then 5 to 10 years. And are things like carbon neutrality and 100% targets for the state things that still feel achievable? And then I'd love to talk a little bit about the policy that's moving its way through the legislature now and how that can play a role in your guys' view.
Yeah, well, I think the cat's out of the bag on this. The renewables are the cheapest form of new generation. It's, no offense to our friends at the utilities, but consumers in DTE are not going to plan over the long term to invest in a technology that's more expensive. That's not their mandate. That's not what they're working on. And both companies have made long-term commitments to reducing carbon emissions. And, in their integrated resource plans, I'll highlight consumers specifically, 6,000 megawatts, 6 gigawatts of solar over by 2040. So I think it is actually, I think these goals are critical and they're pushing us in the right direction, but I actually think they're even more achievable because of the cost declines and the technological improvements and the innovations that the industry's been making over the last couple decades. I mean, I wish I had pulled the numbers exactly, but it's something like 80% decline in the cost of solar over the last decade and 65% decline in the cost of wind. And I don't know what storage, I've forgotten what the storage numbers are, but they're in the middle of the drop. So they're coming down really fast right now. So as that continues to happen, I think the goals become more and more achievable. And I think cities, companies, organizations, states making these kind of commitments really make sure that we hold to that focus. And I think actually, there are concerns that with the pandemic, but I think these investments are smart financial investments. So I actually don't think that we're getting knocked off track at all on these long-term goals.
No, that's great to hear.
And then you asked me another question in that question.
Yes, I did. I often do that. But about policy at the state level, and I want to preface it by saying I think a lot of our listeners are folks thinking of rooftop solar on their houses. 6 gigawatts is amazing, but I think people are sort of looking for an entry point in some ways too. So if you could talk a little bit about sort of the tension there between the really big stuff and the really small stuff. And I know there are bills moving through the legislature now that address that, increasing caps and things. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been spending inordinate amount of time, as has Corey, and a lot of our, I know the folks at Groundwork have too, a lot of our colleagues on these issues. It's really important right now. And EIBC has a huge membership. We have large companies who do utility scale solar. We have a lot of small installers. I think that we are equally supportive of all of them, and in different applications, it makes sense. I think personally that the cost arguments between how much a utility scale solar installation costs and a residential are irrelevant. And this was actually pointed out very clearly by, I don't want to misquote, by someone yesterday at the Senate Energy hearing. I think it was Ed Rivet, actually, from Michigan Conservative Energy Forum, that it doesn't really matter if on a levelized cost basis, residential rooftop solar is more expensive than utility scale solar, because the customer is paying that.
Yeah.
So if I am making that investment, it's not your problem. Like, it's not the utility's problem that it's more expensive. It's my problem. And I will figure out if that's something I want to do. I'll figure out how to do it. And people are making the decision, especially in Michigan with the really high residential rates for electricity, that it makes sense for them. Yeah. So they're doing that more and more. In fact, costs have come down, and that's, I think, costs coming down on one side and the utility rates going up on the other. There's an inflection point where we're seeing lots and lots of people wanting solar on their rooftops all across the state. That's led to significant increases in installations across the state. And, unfortunately, because of all the issues that were being worked out in the 2016 energy legislation, EIBC actually opposed that legislation because it ended net metering. So on that ground alone, despite all the other good stuff in that bill, those bills, we actually opposed it because it switched from net metering to this distributed generation tariff, which we don't think, equitably pays folks for the power they produce at their house. Yep. But it did, and we're moving into that world now. And, I think customers and installers are figuring out how to make that work. They're doing energy storage. That's working out. The problem is we also didn't get rid of the limit on how many people can install rooftop solar. And so now we're in a protracted fight with the utilities to try and raise that cap on how many people or how many kilowatts can be installed on rooftops. And the Public Service Commission has said there's no reason for a cap. The governor's office has said there's no reason for a cap. We've said there's no reason for a cap. Lots of, there are, no other state has as restrictive of a program as ours with a cap.
Wow.
So
Wow.
this is unprecedented. It's a testament to the strength of the utilities in our state and, all the other things that were going on in 2016. So that's one of our most important legislative priorities right now. There's a series of bills that would restore a fair value of solar and also lift the cap in the both in the Senate and the House in Michigan. Unfortunately, there's been less consideration of the bills to change the pricing, but we have had a lot of consideration of the bill that lifts the cap. And just yesterday, I testified in a hearing, and I ended my testimony by saying it was a very disappointing day because we worked so hard and we got to a point where the bill is introduced, put requirements on the MPSC that weren't reasonable and didn't raise the cap. It didn't address the underlying issue. It gave us at most 6 months of more certainty. And, for customers, we don't know what that means. Our best example is what happened in UPCO's territory, where that's in the Upper Peninsula. They hit the cap a couple years ago, and they stopped allowing people to install solar if they were connected to the grid, which most of us have to be. And the other utilities claim they will interconnect you no matter what, even if we hit the cap. But we lose the timelines, we lose the fee structure, we lose the requirements, we lose the ability to hold their feet to the fire on that because there's no law or program after we hit the cap. Wow. So, I think this will continue. It's consumers is expecting to hit their cap by the end of this year, and UPCO is probably even sooner than that. So this isn't an issue long in the future. This is now. If listeners are interested in solar, I would get in now if you're in consumers territory. You've got net metering for another couple of months. And, unless we get this fixed, you may have only a couple of months no matter the payment scheme. So
wow. And what and what can citizen advocates do? So you can get solar on your roof for sure. Are there ways to pressure legislators in your district, candidates who are running? What do you find is most effective for individuals to do who are listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I learned in my time in DC is that you think it may not matter to call your legislator or write an email. And, I'm not as familiar with what they do here in the state, but I'm sure it's very similar. They have someone who sits at the front desk who records all of those. And then in most offices, they have a weekly staff meeting, and they'll ask that person, what were the calls this week about? And what did they say? And they literally have a tally, and they say, we heard 60 people call about this solar cap bill. We don't even know what it is, but 59 of them want us to pass it. And, there's obviously a lot of things that go into a legislator's decision making, but I have seen opinions change. I've seen policy makers change their minds and feel more pressure to do something if they've heard from a lot of folks. So I definitely think, and I think that, Groundworks and MyCan and a lot of these networks have done a really good job of putting out alerts, when you should call or email your legislators. And there was one yesterday from Vote Solar that I think folks circulated. I think that Groundworks put out a letter. So staying connected with these kind of groups that can filter the key talking points, because you don't need to say much. You don't need to know. You don't need to be an academic, PhD expert on whatever this issue is. They don't know it that well either. They're just a front desk person. They're probably an intern. You just need to tell them yes, no on something. And I think that really matters.
That's super helpful. Makes it less intimidating, I think, to jump in. So great. All right, I want to change gears a little bit. And we've been talking a lot recently about just transition. And I know solar has been a wonderful thing for many households, but oftentimes, and investors and companies, but oftentimes those are folks already have means. And so as this revolution, this huge transition is coming, how do we make sure low-income folks, and especially BIPOC low-income folks, are included, are helped, and what role does or can Michigan EIBC and your guys' companies do in helping pushing that forward?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And, this may seem small, but what we committed to a few weeks ago is starting, at least initially, more staff education and more assistance for our members in specifically sort of workforce development, hiring, getting new people into their companies, getting people into the room who may not otherwise have those opportunities. We're working on a survey right now for our members that'll go out soon to find out what they're already doing and what they could use our help, doing better or doing more of, in terms of hiring people of color or from diverse communities or low-income folks. So that's kind of an initial step. I think it's also, I think it's really important to understand the health impacts of fossil fuel generation versus renewable generation, and that's sort of where my background lies, is, looking at mercury pollution and particulate pollution. We did a lot of work in Detroit, the PhD group that I worked with, and there's huge disproportionate impact in communities of color and low-income communities from air pollution, specifically related to fossil fuel generation. So I think transitioning away from, shutting down Bell River, shutting down these large coal-fired power plants disproportionately helps those communities. We're also, on our part, Michigan EIBC, we're committing to take a larger role in making sure that those voices actually get into the room, because I think it's important in a lot of these decision-making processes. At least I've felt like there's just a characterization that this is what the community wants, that this is what would be good for the community. And I don't think we know that unless we get those people to actually speak for themselves. And so, just one small example right now, we're working with a group of stakeholders to advocate that DTE in they're trying to come up with a low-income renewable energy proposal. I don't want to say community solar because it's not really community solar, but that's the characterization. And we're really trying to push, along with a lot of others, that their first step is to really figure out what do the communities in their service territory want. Together with a large group of stakeholders, we're trying to push them that their first step is to get the communities in the room and really do, or hire someone if they can't do it, really meaningful community engagement, and figure out what's most important to those communities. Is it shutting down the coal plant nearby? Is it supporting more renewable development? Is it a bill credit? What do they need and what do they value from a program that's specifically tailored to low-income people?
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And you mentioned community solar in there and how the proposal doesn't really feel like community solar. We've been battling a lot up here trying to figure out what that looks like and how it works. I know Jackson Copel and Solidarity and other folks down there are doing the same. Do you see disruption coming to the point where a community, even without huge policy change, communities can build their own, own it, distribute it, get the benefits? Or is that far off? Or does that need a lot of policy to make happen?
I think we need legislative change, but I don't think that's impossible. And I really hope, and that will be, so we create our policy platform every 2 years. I'm going to propose that that's one of the things at the very top of our policy platform. I think that I think it's possible. I think the utilities view it akin to the choice fight, which they will fight tooth and nail. So, unfortunately, it's kind of in that same bucket. But I think there's a range of things that could be real community solar between what we have now, which really isn't, and full choice.
Yeah.
And I think getting third parties involved with communities that want solar and allowing them to develop a project and then bring it to the utility. There are a lot of ways this could work that I think would enable more community leadership and ownership of these kind of projects. You know, I've actually, when I was in my end of my graduate career, I tried to help the city of Ann Arbor, their energy committee.
Nice.
You know, they're great folks, and they were trying to figure out how to do community solar. And we spent 6 months, you know, trying to figure it out. And the end was just sort of, it doesn't pencil out. It's really hard to do these complicated arrangements where somebody takes the tax equity and somebody else owns it, and you know, sleeve it. And then because you're not the utility, you can't provide a credit on utility bills. And so, it could be, I think there are a lot of potential to do it right. And I think I'm hopeful that other folks, I've seen some real interest in that in the next year. And I think we can really try to work on that.
No, it's fantastic. And I think we're finding up here that it's like, of course, statewide, you need a statewide group to optimize how the pieces fit together. But when you get local, like communities know how to optimize, right? They scrap, they're resilient, they are lean. And so if you leave it to them to craft a solution and then integrate those together, you get a pretty beautiful product versus a top-down solution that hopefully trickles.
Right. And I think to reduce costs, you're right. Like communities are lean, and if you let companies compete, they get to the lowest, you know, to the lowest numbers. They want to win. And if it's run by a monopoly utility, you don't always get that solution. Yep. So figuring out how to make it in the utility business model to allow this to work, I think is, for me, that in my mind, that's the key. That would be the key to the puzzle.
Yeah. And have you seen states that did that well? Is Colorado an example? California, New York, any of the leaders, or has no one really cracked the nut?
You know, there are a lot of other states that have community solar, but I'm in the early stages of trying to figure that out, because I think the key is understanding what the regulatory framework is in that state. So if it's a deregulated state, things are very different than if it's a regulated state. If the utilities have control over distribution but not generation, it's different. So yeah, we're having a bunch of those conversations right now to figure out what is a model we could align ourselves with. I think, and there's also, you know, leadership from folks like Rocky Mountain Institute who are trying to look at things like performance-based regulation and how we change the utility business model to allow this. So I don't have a good model yet. If I'm sure someone listening does, and they have to, I'm happy to talk about it, because we're gearing up to make this a big focus.
Oh, I love that. That's so exciting to hear, Laura. Nice. All right, let me shift again, this time to federal policy. We're hearing about stimulus packages making their way through Congress. Renewable energy industry doesn't seem to be getting quite as much attention as a lot of us think it should. And it's one that, as you were mentioning earlier, was pretty much punched in the face by the COVID crisis in terms of jobs and ability to do projects. So I don't think you guys lobby federally, but if you were to, or if you just sat down with someone crafting this, what would you ask for in terms of what Michigan needs from a federal perspective to help them get back on track and keep the momentum that was going?
Yeah, so you're right. We don't lobby federally, so I'm less adept on these issues at this point. But I think, you know, what we heard from our members, and what we have consistently heard, is the small business relief programs are still and remain really important. I think beyond that, you know, one of the biggest tools in the toolbox for the federal government is tax credits. And I think there have been proposals to change the way that the tax credits are applied to make them direct payments rather than, because if folks have lost all their tax equity, they may not be able to take a tax credit, but they could take a direct payment. So I think that's a key issue that folks have been talking about, extending the tax credits to allow us to get over this hurdle, especially since, you know, construction stopped and folks weren't able to do installations, I think would be really important. And then, for me personally, I think supporting state and local governments right now is really critical. I think they've, you guys know they've taken a huge hit, the state budget and all local budgets. And that trickles into all the businesses that operate there. It changes, conversations about tax liability for projects that want to be in local areas. And so I really think shoring up those local governments is important now as well.
Nice. And on a related note, we saw the Biden campaign recently came out with a $2 trillion climate plan. I'm not sure how much you've looked at it, but I'm curious on your thoughts of an investment of that size, what it could do for Michigan, and if something like that were to happen, regardless of whose office, what as Michigan we'd be looking for, and how a package like that could really jumpstart things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think in trillions of dollars, but that would be, wonderful to focus on climate and clean energy. And I admit to having not read the plan in detail yet, but I think, for us, it's all, any investment like that is going to create jobs. And it's about allowing our economy to sort of giving us a jump start to keep going. And I think, especially in technology development, in terms of, innovation, in terms of spurring new ideas forward, there's a lot of good ideas that could probably decrease costs, could increase efficiency, could, help us get the next big thing, that are not yet funded and that we need more ability to invest in. Michigan's made huge investments in battery manufacturing under Governor Granholm's administration. And that really, I think, put us on a really good path to take advantage of the electric vehicle market coming down the pipe, and now energy storage as well. But I'm not sure that we've necessarily connected those dots and taken full advantage of the opportunities under that funding might have provided. So I think there's a lot that our economy could do with more sort of investments in that kind of R&D. And my mind immediately just goes to the auto industry and the manufacturing and sort of innovation possibilities there, especially with all the investments in automated, connected, shared, electrified transportation that we're seeing. But we need more charging stations. We need more affordable vehicles for folks. And, I think there's investments that could be made at the fleet level, at the state level, and with, at the sort of innovation level that would really help spur that along.
Nice. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the advanced mobility. Connecting the dots, I feel like, is a lot of what you guys are doing these days. Clean energy, efficiency, distribution, storage, mobility, kind of doing it all. Are you seeing those dots start to connect? And specifically in advanced mobility, where do you see us 5 to 10 years from now? And what has to happen policy-wise and from your guys' member groups to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. I think at the state level, they're really doing a good job of starting to connect those dots. There's a new office of, I'm going to screw up the title. I think it's the Office of Mobility, Advanced Transportation and Electrification. I'm sure that's not right, and I apologize to the new director, Trevor Paul, who's wonderful, and to their staff. But essentially, the point is that it's advanced transportation and our mobility future, but it explicitly also calls out electrification. So it's clearly like trying to combine those together and bring them into one unified place to look at what the policy should be to make those changes moving forward. The governor's also done a lot in the regulatory sphere with trying to advance that with the new My Power Grid initiative, which is basically trying to bring all buckets of grid modernization into one place, and to try and allow more integration of renewables, meet her climate goals, address carbon pollution, in the regulatory sphere and sort of trying to connect the dots there. So I think it is happening more and more. We do a lot of work with Mish Auto, which is a sort of similar to us trade organization of the automakers, and also interested in the future of mobility. Actually, Glenn Stevens, their executive director, is now on the Institute for Energy Innovation board. So he's directly helping us. Yeah. And that question of where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years, everything, I mean, maybe, the pandemic set us back a little bit, maybe on electric vehicles, but I really don't think much. And I think the key is, are we going to build them in Michigan, and are we going to deploy them in Michigan? And that's, I think, the inflection point that we need to decide as a state, that we want that to happen, that we don't want to lose dominance to Silicon Valley and other places where they're making successfully electric vehicles and deploying them more than we are here. So we've put out a proposal. We had a report that we published last December with support from the Porter Family Foundation to make recommendations to the state, to the administration, on what they can do to help advance the electric mobility future. And one of those, we already have $65 million from the Volkswagen settlement in Michigan. Yeah. They have a plan right now where some of that money is going to diesel retrofits, some of it's going to electric vehicle charging, various different things. We proposed to them, do what Colorado did. This is actually, drawing on a Colorado example to bring it full circle. And let's commit 100% of those funds to electrifying transportation. So, let's do electric school buses. Let's get the kids away from diesel emissions as they're waiting for the buses. Yeah. Let's do 100%, electric trucking. Let's maximize the amount we're spending on electric charging stations. So that's one part of it. And the other part of our plan is actually, our proposal was to switch the state fleet. So you can lead by example. You can help incentivize other folks by buying more and leasing more electric vehicles at the state level yourself. And so that, that's a little more complicated with a state budget that's in free fall. Yeah. But we actually now, we're working on an article right now, and we're going to have a convening in August. There's actually, you can make use of the electric vehicles you already have now in a more efficient manner, like a first out type of a policy, which North Carolina has and Colorado has as well, where we could actually justify the purchase of more electric vehicles by first making use of the ones we have already in a better manner, which actually, if your goal is carbon reductions, it doesn't matter if you own 10 EVs if they just sit in the lot, right? Right. It matters if you use them. So we're sort of shifting our thinking on that into a world where we don't have a huge state budget to still look at carbon reductions and electric vehicle use and get the state to support in that manner.
Fantastic. No, that's great. And you guys are doing so much. I'm wondering how our listeners can plug in. I know if they're companies they should join, and you guys put on amazing events that we always end up at and love and get inspired by and put out reports. Anything you want to say on sort of how folks can connect to Michigan EIBC?
Yeah, if there are companies, we would love to connect with you. Please, email one of us and reach out. We'd love to have you join. If you're an independent consultant, we have lots of people who sort of have a consulting firm on their side job and join us through that. So there's sort of other avenues. And as you said, a lot of our events are open to the public. So we have a series of networking events. Throughout the year, we have an annual conference, which is actually now in August, virtual, obviously. And we've got a great lineup for that. Yeah, that should be really fun, including a happy hour with lots of opportunity for networking. And we have a gala every year, which is sort of an awards dinner that involves lots of networking. We also have a newsletter that goes out every week. Anyone can be on that list. So if you just want more information about what's going on in the advanced energy industry in Michigan and across, I guess, advanced energy industry in general, feel free you can subscribe right on our website. It's a hard website, but it's mieibc.org. So www.mieibc.org. And you can subscribe there. And then, I guess we're always also willing to chat with folks who have, interesting new ideas. We love working with Groundworks and other organizations. Here's another idea. If you have an organization that's not a company, but, a member organization based in Michigan, we have a state partner program now. And I think you guys are a state partner of ours now. I'm pretty sure, or we're going to be soon. We're working on it if we haven't gotten it done.
Yeah, no, we're in.
And that involves, that involves cross publication of events and invites to events, that kind of stuff. So lots of different ways we'd love to connect with folks.
Fantastic. And there's this great quote, and I don't know if it's Gus Speth's or if he shared it, but it was about looking into the abyss, but not getting stuck there. So I'd like to end, if you're willing, on, this is a hard time and this is a hard industry to be part of, but it's also beautiful and full of opportunity. So what makes you the most optimistic these days about all of it?
At EIBC, Corey and I have instituted a new policy where on Friday we try to have a sort of a heck yeah moment where we go through the week and we say, here's what we did that we think we're making a difference. And I think, looking at the little things and looking at the direction, taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture, the costs are coming down. This is inevitable that we're moving towards renewables and advanced energy. And I think sometimes it's right, we can get lost in the details of all the battles that we're waging, but I really think the arc of history is in our favor, and the reality of the costs and the technological innovations are in our favor. And I'm really, our members really inspire me too. It's hard, as you said, we're going through a hard period, but they're so innovative. If there's a challenge and, this isn't going to work, they're coming up with a different way to make something else work. And so they're always innovating, always coming up with new ways and trying to advance their industry and advance their companies. And I think that really gives me hope too. Nice.
Well, that's good. Let's end the interview with a heck yeah moment. Thanks for all you're doing. Thanks for your time today and for all the work Michigan EIBC is doing and has done. And we look forward to carrying it forward with you in the future.
Thank you. Good to talk with you. It's fun.
Thanks, Laura. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. You can find more episodes of the Speaking of Resilience podcast on our website, groundworkcenter.org/podcast, and on all major podcast platforms. If you appreciate this content and want more of it, become a podcast supporter by donating at groundworkcenter.org/podcast, and we'll give you a shout out in our next episode. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast wherever you listen in, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps other listeners find the Speaking of Resilience podcast. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Groundwork Center and at Michigan Climate Action Network. Speaking of Resilience is created by the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities and the Michigan Climate Action Network. This episode was produced by Miriam Owsley and Jeff Smith, hosted by Dan Worth.